Welcome to our artist studio visit with Alice Theobald. My name's Gavin Wade. I'm artist curator here at Eastside Projects, and I've also got Neve on the line as well. So we're working with Alice and seeing how a project evolves and develops, and we'll chat a little bit about that today. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of sort of intro to Alice. So Alice has been working with us over the past year or so as the Wheatley Fellow, and that's the fellowship which is offered each year via the School of Art at Birmingham City University. It's a really interesting fellowship that supports an artist for a year, and Eastside Projects have collaborated with the school on supporting and developing the Wheatley Fellowship and leading to projects that happen here at Eastside Projects over about the past 4 years, I think now 4 or 5 years. And Alice has been on an extended journey because she's been on maternity leave also, and maybe we'll get around to talking about that a little bit also. And we were really excited to invite Alice to work with us. Partly, we're kind of experimenting with the way that we're collaborating with artists at the moment, and we're using the term incidental artists. So there's a built-in stage of research and a kind of feasibility study and thinking about what the context is, partly picking up on the history of Artist Placement Group. And they had a term called the incidental persons, which was a replacement for the word artist. We still like the word artist, so we've included it as incidental artist. We think that's an interesting term in the current climate. And we were really taken with Alice's proposition, and I'll just hope you don't mind, Alice. I'm just going to read the little quote from Sanford Meisner that we've used, because I think it's an interesting phrase that kind of wraps up and captures possibilities. And the phrase is acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And I think that there's a connection between that and Alice's work, which uses performance and video installation, sound and text, sculpture, musical composition, all sorts of elements within the work. And I guess we're really intrigued by the relationship of scripting and improvisation that happens in Alice's work, and that seems to be part of the tools that you play with. So Alice is based in Birmingham, so that's an interesting one also, that I think even though it's quite relatively recently, over the past couple of years now, I guess, have moved into Birmingham. So you're not even new anymore. You're kind of like, you're a full Brummie now. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it feels a bit like homecoming, because I was from Leicester, which I know is different. It's not the West Midlands, but I grew up in Leicester till I was 11, and about 5 years ago, started having a real pang for just like the Midlands, like missing it a lot. Cool. So yeah, it's nice to be back in the Midlands.
Yeah, I felt the same from when I was living in London for a long time, and then I didn't want to live in London anymore. I wanted to live back in Birmingham, feel the Midlands.
Yeah,
and I've heard other people from Loughborough and Leicester still feel a connection of, I don't know, a kind of the visual language and spatial language of the Midlands. It is shared across those areas. So I think there is something interesting there.
Yeah, I think I mean, I hate to generalize or stereotype. A lot of my work's about that anyway, but I feel there's a special kind of humor in the Midlands, which is different, I think, from my experience of living in the South and then in London, and having a lot of friends in the North. I don't know, there's a different, get quite interested in these kind of what's it called, like national kind of identities that are sort of adopted, quite early on in the research for this, I watched Jonathan Mead's documentary on Birmingham, and he was talking about that as well before I'd even he was talking about this sort of self-deprecating kind of humor, and talking about this imaginary curtain called the irony curtain, where it kind of stops it. There's like this, the irony curtain happens in the Midlands, where like the North are like very straight talking, and then like the South are sort of have this other kind of this sense of irony, and then the Midlands is just like its own thing. And I don't know, but it's
that is interesting. I don't remember that, the irony curtain. That's
great.
And
then I tried to research it, and I was like, what is the irony? Is that a thing? Like, is that like a thing? And then there's nothing on it apart from, I think it was just Jonathan Mead that just kind of invented his own theory of which, without really going into much detail about it. And I quite liked it as a visual, I don't know, a kind of visual description somehow of of like the North-South divide.
How does that? So we're gonna chat, everybody. We're gonna chat through something. And I want to start with finding out a little bit about the studio, but then also we'll leave time at the end for questions. Hopefully we won't talk for too long, maybe half an hour, something like that, and see how that goes. I'm kind of interested in this space immediately. Like, it was like 10 minutes ago when Alice came on, was like, wow, there's all these keyboards that you're surrounded with. It's like a stage for lots of things happening in this space.
Yeah.
They're on all around you, aren't they? It's like,
I haven't touched them in quite a while, unfortunately. But I don't know.
Yeah, what else is there? Yeah, you got mixers.
There's an organ which I've lumbered around about several different kind of location, like houses and flats that I've lived in for like the past 20 years, which gone up various stairs and all sorts, and then there's these there's a synthesizer there and like another kind of organ. I
think if I was there in the studio with you, I'd want to we turn them all on and just get them fired up, you know. It would be great.
Yeah.
The unexpected studio visit. And then there's the work behind you, which was it in other words, or
so in French it's translated to in other words, or the more direct translation is that is to say.
That is to say.
C'est-à-dire, and that's the last. So I've as Gavin said, I've basically been on maternity leave since I officially started the fellowship, and just sort of really back into early stages of thinking about what about this work, about the fellowship. But this was the last piece of work that I did before going on maternity on a residency. I'm bringing really close up to it because it's made out of mosaic.
Yeah, it looks great when you can see all the tiles. So is it actually tiles? Is it?
It's this tiny little glass.
Glass.
It's glass. Yeah.
Okay. So that's why it completely glows when the light is on inside it.
It glows, but it's got a French plug, so I can't put it on, unfortunately. It's a light box. And it's also got these little negative. I don't know if you can see there. It's like of a room, a little negative side, and then it's the same one but at a different angle on here.
Okay.
Here, so that lights up as well. But
Was that shown somewhere? Was that made for a particular place?
No, it was kind of there was I did a residency in south of France this time last year, and there was like a sort of studio visit that was part of that at the end. So I was shown at that, but no, apart from that, it's just there. It just exists. It's kind of my every 5 years I attempt to make it's like, oh, maybe I should have like more of a studio practice where I can come in and make something and I just sort of have this craving to use my hands and make stuff, because my work is so project based and like editing and research, and based on, I guess, always working up towards an exhibition or an installation or a film, that now and again I have this attempt at sort of having more of a studio practice, and then but every time I don't know how sculptors do it or painters, like I don't know how you have the space to keep stuff. Like, yeah, but
how do you use it the other times then? What do you fall back into?
Drawing sometimes, and what else? Yeah, it's always been kind of sculpture, I guess. I did these other mosaics before, but they were sort of plinths. They ended up being plinths for like television, but they were like for televisions that had video. So it kind of went back to being an installation. But
so when you're not making those things, are you using the studio more just as like more like an office in a way, or as a place just to work through thoughts and writing and
and basically and editing a lot of the time. I edit my work, my films, and that's kind of a real creative process as well. The editing part is really and making the soundtracks to things, which is often a large part of the work as well.
Hence all the keyboards. And is that and the studio is in your house?
Yes.
Okay. And have you previously had studios not in your house though, or have you always tended to work from home?
I've had studios. The last time I had a studio was when I lived in London, that was outside the house. It was in London, and that was 8 years ago now that I left London. So and then I guess I've often worked with residencies, which so like studios have kind of shifted, so taking on so since leaving London, there's been residency at Primary, and 2 in France, one in Dagenham at the White House there, and so they've kind of shifted around, and I guess the work is often quite reactive as well to
I imagine that feels to me like it sort of suits you and your works, that you focus on particular things and you just do it within the context, within the situation. It kind of feeds into it, so things from like location or place kind of it kind of feeds into the work, sometimes more directly than other times. It can be like a really tangent link to the place, or sometimes much more directly. Yes. So how do you, I suppose what I'm interested in is the thought processes, and I know you've got this little set of notes which I think is interesting to look at.
So share. So like I said, full disclosure, this is all very early, even though I've been officially on the fellowship for a year. It feels still very early, early stages, and trying to navigate what my practice is, in a way, after sort of quite some large life events over the past couple of years. With like having a baby and caring for somebody, that's developing into, he's 9 months old, so I'm like, it's developing into a person. But like, so I'm at the beginning of their life. And then I was also looking after my mum last year, who died. So at end of life, sort of looking after it. So there's these kind of
That's
big
big.
life events which are trying to sort of work out, you know, these are inevitably going to be feeding into thoughts and then into the work. And so there's, you know, there's often, there's still the same sort of themes that I'm always going back to, but it's just how trying to be, I guess, honest with myself, with, or like true to myself as to how to sort of go,
Well, that also connects back to what you first pitched, the idea of what is authenticity, and what is the way that we behave, what is acting, or what is, or if acting is so authentic, does that become the reality? All these sorts of things. Yeah, it's interesting. Even when you're not talking about them, you're just talking about yourself, but it's still there, isn't it? So
yes. So I'll share a bit about my process and sort of current thinking.
Is there a starting point? Yes.
So Gavin will know that I've been going back and forth with different, but every time we have a meeting, I'll come with like a new sort of thing. But then in my mind, they all connect. But when I say it out loud, it feels like it doesn't, like they're all like, I'm coming in with like a new idea. But it all connects. And I was saying the other day how my thoughts they're not linear. They're, I think probably like many artists, they're very, very layered, and I find it very hard to talk about things in a very linear way. So, and I think that comes across probably in my work in general, because it's just these layers of like sound, music, text, gesture, video, like it's all very like I guess that's how, I don't know, you know what I mean. So so I guess
did you start with the authenticity area?
I started with the improvisation, because that's kind of been where I've been looking at, like most recently. It's kind of like the newest part, I guess, of where my thinking's taken me, even though improvisation's been like a really key part to my process, and I've used it all the time throughout my work. I've never really I guess looked into it deeply as a technique in terms, like sort of historically, I guess, as it's I've never kind of really, what's the word, like looked at it in
well, you haven't made it be the subject or the bit in the foreground of the project.
I guess so. I mean, I've kind of looked a lot at Meisner like other sort of theatre sort of acting techniques, such as Meisner technique and method acting, and sort of looked more into like the theories around that, but not so much improvisation, even though it's what I use very often in pretty much every single piece that I've done, whether it's the music, the soundtrack that comes into things, or when I play with my band, like it all starts off with like improvising together, and then sort of pulling out the bits that we like out of that. So
it's interesting whether it's like the more, if you analyze it too much, do you lose the magic of the spontaneity, or is true spontaneity actually trained?
Well, this is what I've been finding interesting, sort of looking into it much more as a technique, because it is a practice. Improvisation is a practice. It's not, even though it's something that's very open to beginners all the time, it seems like it's a very open sort of scene as somehow, but there's also something quite professionalized about it.
There's a book there that says yes and
so there's this book that I've been looking at, which is Yes and, which is Yes and is like one of the main games, I guess, or kind of strategies in improv where they'll add yes and as a way to sort of add on to if there's as a way to add on to the next line, if you know what I mean. So it's an improv game, yes and and Second City is an improv group that was founded in Chicago quite early on, one of the sort of first improv groups from
when was that? What era is that?
That was 1958. So
okay.
I mean, it's one that I think made it popular again, rather than, they didn't invent improv, but they sort of made it popular, a popular tool in other sort of within sort of acting circles.
And was that feeding into theatre or film or?
So theatre, but all of it. So Stanislavski used it in method acting. So he'd sort of there'd be a script. He'd work with script, but then would sort of take characters from the script and make actors sort of improvise around a completely different scenario that isn't in the script, for example. And so it was adopted in that way, and then it was adopted by it started to become really popular. Improv-based training became popular amongst politicians and presenters, and so I sort of found that kind of, or like almost like as a tool to be able to speak better and to sort of be confident and present better sort of in real life. So it has been like co-opted a lot in, I think, a lot of training in speech training comes from improv techniques, and and I think there's this kind of I guess this kind of inherent contradiction that I'm always interested in with the idea of authenticity. Like once you start training in something, particularly with acting, once you start training and rehearsing, there's this contradiction of like training and rehearsing to get to something that appears more authentic and truthful, a truthful interpretation or representation of a certain character. Almost like the further away you get from it, the more you sort of rehearse it, the further away, or somehow it feels that you are from some kind of truth. So and I always find that kind of contradiction really, I don't know, it just kind of blows my mind a little bit.
But it's interesting just in relation to art practice in general, the idea of making something in a studio or making it for yourself and then remaking or making another work, the retrying out of a set of ideas or approaches that.
And once you've got like the tools, like I guess it's the same with any creative. Once you've got the tools and you're practiced at something really, you're really well practiced at your art, at your chosen tool, your chosen art, then you're able to find some sort of freedom within it, to do it well. And so it's kind of and that sort of links into all these ideas around success, or how we kind of judge success. And so that's why I'm kind of also then interested in like the amateur. And
I didn't see that you've put on the name of the guy we met last week at the improv night, John Trevor, self-proclaimed godfather of improv. And I've noticed that you've put director of Fox of Frogs, but I think it's Box of Frogs, isn't it?
Yeah, there's loads of typos. You mentioned, when we went through this the other day, I spelled failure wrong, and that's not a mistake. I mean, that's not that was a real mistake. I was like,
it's a great mistake.
Like, I'm not going to correct it. I'm staying real. I'm also very dyslexic, so that's I'm gonna blame it on that.
But Fox of Frogs is quite funny because fox was the word that got shouted out.
True. I am going to change that one. I'm changing that. So
Yeah.
that's Fox of Frogs, which is an improv group in Birmingham, and I mean, yeah, we went to a improv night last week, which was yeah, very interesting, and there was a lot of techniques. You could sort of see some of, so they'd ask members of the audience to kind of give these kind of starting points or triggers for them to improvise around, but then you could see that they'd have these different kind of strategies in terms of how to go about the improvising. So again, like you could see these kind of yeah, there was a sort of structure within the way that they improvised that they wanted to, that they would, yeah, that they'd practice somehow. But
and also sort of interesting as just like a method of hanging out together, just a way to spend time. And
yeah, so it's a real lifestyle. So I mean, yeah, so that's, as well as being in, you know, researching it as a process, improvisation as a process and a tool. Yeah, I'm interested in that, the sort of social element and the lifestyle around it. So none of them came from theatre backgrounds, I don't think. Not even, I'm not sure whether John Trevor, the self-proclaimed godfather of improv, was.
I think so, no.
But he, yeah, there were people from like, they were like school teachers. I think there was a school teacher there, an IT.
Yes, someone from NHS, wasn't there, I think?
Yeah, so it was like,
yeah,
and he was describing improvisation as like this like real addictive thing, and also that it made him a better person, that it's made them all better people. It almost felt like a bit of a religion somehow. Like
yeah, because he said that he does it, I think he said he does it 5 nights a week.
Did he? Wow, I didn't.
Yeah, because he leads groups and classes, and we went to a performance. It was like they'd been rehearsing, hadn't they, and practicing to do something, even though it's still fully improvised on the night.
So it's like a, what did they call it? Like, it wasn't like a strategy. It was a, what's the word they use?
I can't remember. I haven't got a little flyer.
No, not in the flyer. It was
a phrase that he said.
Yeah, no, they practiced like a, I guess like a game somehow. It wasn't a game, but like some kind of strategy that they would adopt. Like
they shared an interesting one at the end, didn't they? Where they said it was the first time they're trying it out, and somebody would, like a couple would start improvising and acting, and then others would just come in and tell them things about themselves, and then they had to carry on acting because they changed clothes, or they had teeth that stuck out, or a broken leg or whatever. You know, you told it to them, and then they had to carry on. So, which was quite a spectacle. It was quite amazing.
Yeah, it was like really fast paced, and it's kind of directing. Different people would come in and direct sort of the next, how it would sort of like follow on. So that, so it feels like there's quite a lot of there's a lot of similarities in how I make my work, actually, in the process in which creating these kind of games somehow to then, and structures to be able to sort of work around.
So what you feel, but after you felt that you want to get more involved, don't you? You want to do some more, or you want to join in the process with them at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm going to in January, I'm starting a 12-week course in improv with John Trevor. Sorry, I don't know why I find that funny, but it's so that should be, that'll be quite an intensive introduction to it, really. And yeah, kind of the first time I'm really kind of working in that way with, yeah, solely on kind of improv, which well, that
I think
isn't
it'd be interesting.
that isn't my own way of doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's doing it within
So
the
you respond to the parameters that he comes up with in the class.
yeah. And
Yeah.
there are long-standing ones like that have come from the sort of improv, sort of book of improv. And then I guess it'll be interesting to see how that develops, and also wondering, I may find some people to also work with on my own project as I go, as it develops. So it's also a way of meeting people as well locally. I guess I've always worked with people in one form or another, whether it's people I meet on a residency or whether it's friends. I've got various collaborators and that I'd work with on certain elements, like such as the soundtrack or bits of kind of performance in different works. So it's kind of
I think it'd be interesting to look at a bit of the film that you made recently, only a year or so. Because I'm kind of thinking of that film now. Every time you're talking about the different bits, I'm thinking of how much is in that film already. That it'd be interesting to show it and then talk about how the improvisation works in that film.
Yeah. So so I'll show a bit of Il y aura, There Will Be, which is a French film, which, so to say about the structure of it, or like how it was made, was that I did this. Actually, I'll just show it first, and then it'll be easier to.
Yeah, cool.
So this is a short clip. It's about 18 minutes long initially, but this is sort of in the middle. Give you a sense of it.
You'll have to.
Plusieurs petits regards coquins. Petits regards coquins.
Alex, you have to come out first. You have to unshare your screen and then reshare. Yeah.
Where am I?
Yeah, that's it. Cool.
Plusieurs petits regards coquins. Petits regards coquins. Redites-moi cette phrase avec un petit regard coquin. Il y aura plusieurs petits regards coquins. Oui, on continue. Il y aura des beaux corps typiques dans la piscine. Oui. Il y aura des histoires d'amour compliquées. Oui. Il y aura des...
Ah, we lost the sound.
Des élèves avec des pulsions sexuelles élevées. Plus vite. Il y aura des élèves avec des pulsions sexuelles élevées. Ouais, continue. Alors, la suite. Il y aura des leçons de piano. Oui. Il y aura un premier baiser à la patinoire à l'âge de 12 ans. En chuchotant, il y aura un premier baiser à la patinoire. Il y aura un premier baiser à la patinoire. On continue. Il y aura des enfants qui font des rêves. Oui. Il y aura des adolescents qui fument des gauloises blondes. Oui, allez, plus vite. Il y aura un chien allongé dans l'ombre. Oui. Il y aura un chat qui se lave en plein soleil. On continue. Il y aura des amis qui donnent des mauvais conseils. Des mauvais conseils. Oui. Il y aura des jolies jeunes filles en maillot de bain, peut-être de la couleur jaune. Peut-être deux couleurs jaunes. Oui, on continue. Il y aura une déclaration d'amour. Il y aura des impulsions. Des impulsions. Il y aura des impulsions homosexuelles, mais pas complètement accomplies. Il y aura un rendez-vous sur la plateforme 2, Gare du Nord. Voilà, on continue. À midi. Très bien. Ensuite il y aura des grosses larmes authentiques. Oui, ensuite il y aura des discothèques qui jouent de la musique nostalgique. Plus fort. Il y aura des discothèques qui jouent de la musique. Qui jouent de la musique nostalgique. Ensuite, il y aura des secrets entre amis. Ensuite, il y aura des jeunes femmes qui se promènent seules dans la nuit. À la fin de la nuit. Il y aura des vieilles dames accompagnées par un compagnon.
Il y aura une vieille dame accompagnée par un compagnon.
Il y aura une vieille dame accompagnée par un compagnon.
Il y aura
un homme qui fait une dépression.
Il y aura un homme dans la quarantaine qui fait une dépression.
Il y aura un homme dans la quarantaine qui fait une dépression.
Oui.
Yeah, so
where you cut it at that big moment.
Yeah. And it
The
goes
moment
into this
feeling.
kind of weird kind of dance waltz, awkward waltz, where they dance and this kind of dream sequence, and then it carries on into more there will be scenarios, and it gets more and more intense, and and so, but yeah, to go back to sort of the process of making that came out of, so the basically the only part of it that was scripted were these lines, like there's an intro that I didn't show there, but then it goes into these lines that it's like this sort of lesson, a kind of language lesson, but it's also a kind of perform lesson in kind of the lesson's quite ambiguous in exactly what's going on. He's kind of directing as well, how to say the lines or how to deliver them, and so yeah, so I wrote all these lines, and my instruction to the other actor was for him to tell me how to say it, and he'd be correcting me. So I'm going all over the place. I'm half French, but I am bilingual, but I say things, don't speak it that I still make quite a lot of mistakes when I speak, and so he's kind of telling me they're real corrections essentially of my telling of them. And
that's because you haven't lived in France for so long, so you sort of lost. But at one point you only spoke in French.
No, I was I've always spoken. I had always spoken in French with my mum and in English with my dad. So yeah, in French was always the main language in our household. But yeah, I've lost it. I've lost the French over the years, after, you know, when you leave home and you're not practicing it every single day, and yeah, I guess you get kind of, I just got a bit lazy with it, to be honest, but but yeah, I've been kind of interested in this kind of miscommunicate, like, I guess the insufficiency of language and the insufficiency of communication, and it kind of not really being, not always being enough, and this kind of miscommunication, which I've experienced a lot with French-speaking family, including my mother, and I guess there's some of that in there, but there's also a strong interest in learning methods, in pedagogy, and as well as sort of yeah, so he's kind of acts as this teacher, and this kind of the kind of power dynamics in that are apparent in learning and in pedagogy. So
yeah, it's sort of interesting because you're making yourself quite vulnerable as the character in there, and it's really forceful against you, but then you've set it up.
Yeah,
so it's quite a weird dynamic going, like a self exploration that you've set up, that maybe, as if you, I don't know whether afterwards you're like, oh my god, I'll never do that again, or you feel like, oh, it was so great because it was so intense, and so it worked, the artwork in the end.
I think I feel like when things are too, there's a lot of it that was set up that was very, very within, you know, it's set up within really quite strict parameters. Like there was just, we choreographed the whole, how we moved around the space. It's all one take. Actually, it was all two takes. So that was where the cut is, where the dance is where the cut, and then it goes on for like another sort of 8 minutes, all in one take. So, but I think like allowing there to be, I feel like the more strict and the more parameters there is in something you set up, the more you're setting up yourself to kind of fail somehow. And I think I'm kind of interested in allowing these unexpected moments to happen and working with them.
Is that what that's the spillage of the tomato juice is in your mind also then? Is that making visible of that failure or impossibility? Or
yeah, I guess so. I mean, that was a planned spillage. It wasn't like it was a scripted, again, it's something that was scripted within it. But I guess the slippage between the bit that's and how the dynamic between the two characters kind of develop was also discussed, like how initially the female character is much more she comes in quite confident and he's a lot more tentative, and then it really shifts into him getting more and more frustrated and her losing her kind of her will and sort of her and and it becomes this more sort of tense.
How did you decide like the location and that main actor, who is a really well-known actor, isn't he? He's quite a famous actor. So how was that part of the thinking or the setup, or just your impulses in a way? What were they?
I mean, he is in Call My Agent, which is a French sort of drama TV series, and which came out sort of there's been several of them over the last sort of few years, and where he plays like the head agent of an acting agency. And I approached him not really thinking he'd be interested, but in doing this, and but he was, and so and I'd also known him as an actor from some films by Arnaud Desplechin, which I really there's like early French films from Desplechin's earlier films from the 90s, which I find really interesting, which are really heavy dialogue, but of students. It's like kind of student life, sort of intellectual life, very French, very kind of Parisian, and he's in those. But then he was never been really like a famous. This new role in Call My Agent is what's really made him famous. He's kind of become bigger later in life, I guess. And I've been kind of interested. I became kind of interested in his career after recognizing him from these kind of indie films from the 90s that I watched, but that I watched before, and recognized him from. And I mean, it kind of and when I approached him, I spoke to him, he was also familiar with the play which this Il y aura is like loosely kind of inspired from, which is by Ionesco, The Lesson by Ionesco, and he's an absurdist playwright, and he'd played this role before when he was much younger, so it's kind of he kind of got it, and he was like, just up for it. I can't remember what the question was. Just sort of saying why I
He
chose
was
him.
in that film. The actor was in the film that was one of the references.
It was a play. Like it's a very famous play in I guess sort of acting circles for like absurdist. It's a relatively famous play, and so it's kind of
So in a way, it's like the idea was driving it, and then he's like this perfect counterpart to be in the film. I totally get it. Yeah, I've sort of forgotten. Because
I think I got him at a good cusp in his career where like he was just up for stuff. And now he probably, I don't know if I asked him now whether he would have been up for it, because he's kind of doing much, like he's suddenly very busy and doing bigger, greater things.
Has the film been shown in France? Have you shown it?
It's been shown, it was shown in at Gallery in Paris, first there and then at the South London Gallery.
Were you able to tell the difference of responses of people in France to it than in London because of that, of knowing who the actor is? Or I mean, sometimes it's impossible to tell, but I just wondered if in case.
It was hard to tell. I think people definitely knew him in London. Who'd been watching, because it was like a Netflix. It was like on Netflix, and it had like.
Because I recognize him from something else, but I haven't seen Call My Agent, but I've seen something with him in. So.
He's in also. What's it called? The Western Front. What's it called? That war film. Somebody in the chat will probably know that came out really recently. Beyond the Western Front.
I've seen him somewhere. Is it All Quiet on the Western Front?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. All Quiet. He was in that.
Cool. I've just realised. So I realised the time. We should open it out, because we have been talking. See, I knew it would go fast.
Yeah.
We should open it out to everyone.
There's a couple of questions.
Oh, are there? Cool. I
Um,
haven't seen that yet.
Tell more about the fellowship and motherhood. More about the fellowship in brackets and motherhood.
Motherhood.
Yeah. Maybe I haven't spoken much about the fellowship, or have I?
Well, I guess that's I don't know.
And motherhood.
Is it more about motherhood or more about the fellowship?
I'm just gonna change.
The other question is, how did the idea of the film come to you? It is great.
I guess I kind of covered that a bit, how the idea came.
Because it is coming out of your. I mean, it is coming out of your life, isn't it? And your identity and your relationship.
Yeah, there was like a mix. The lines came out of a mix of kind of personal memory and cliche, sort of French cliches, which I think most people might recognize, and then the lines become more and more kind of kind of more nuanced and more personal and a bit weirder, and
but it's a really great tool.
It started with the lines.
Okay.
Il y aura, like I just sort of collected all these lines, and then I read the La Leçon. It all started also. I was on a residency when I was in Bordeaux, where I was kind of trying to get closer to my roots, my French roots. And language, I guess, was sort of my difficulty with the language.
And so is there I don't know, embedded in that question, I don't know, I'm just wondering, is there a sense of the idea of motherhood being part of a time when you're being an artist? Is there do you have an interest in that becoming part of subject matter, part of content, part, or are you actually resisting that, and trying
I feel like I'm kind of resisting it, because I feel like it will inevitably kind of feed into it somehow, but I don't want to. I feel like I'm resisting it being too head on, if you know what I mean. Like it's,
yeah.
I mean, at the moment, I'm completely consumed by motherhood. The baby's just he started nursery for like 4 weeks now, but just on a Monday. So Monday is my one day of, and then at the moment I'm doing the sort of workshops as part of a module at the art school, BCU, in the mornings. So then I've just got, a few hours in the afternoon basically to cram in my art, doing some washing and like doing bits of other admin, so it's kind of
because on your list of success here, you've just got like, what does it mean to be successfully authentic, and then you've got celebrities and local success stories. But I'm just wondering how that does success, the ideas, the concepts of success change because
I mean, it all becomes very meta, or this I feel like my life kind of certainly kind of feeds into these themes, always feed into these sort of themes, which I try to broaden out into something bigger rather than too personal. But then the personal is always in there, but I try not for it to be, I don't know, I guess I've always sort of resisted it being too apparently personal, if you know what I mean. So because I feel like I try to engage in things that are a bit more kind of universal feelings, I suppose, but not too directly like autobiographical or like
like it feels like in that film, even though there are so many connections, it's still the structure and the flow and the format and the whole framing is outside and bigger than it only being about you. I think
I mean, the structure is, and the process, and kind of there being a real focus on that is, and almost sort of exposing the construction to an extent of the work is always something that I've done, but also but then also kind of trying to, it's kind of exposing sort of almost sort of cinematic tools or theatrical tools that might kind of seduce a viewer, but whilst trying to seduce them at the same time. Like I'm still trying to do that as well, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of or trying to draw them in. Like it's not just about process, like sort of written here somewhere. The process is always a metaphor for the subject, which is life, human behavior, and how we present ourselves and how we miscommunicate. So it's the process becomes very much part of the subject, but then the subject is something that's perhaps more human and less dry than just the process. That's kind of, I hope.
Cool. Are there any other questions from anyone? Because we're actually drawing to an end, sadly. Can't see any. Oops.
Or if anyone wants to
no,
speak out loud.
That's okay. Well, I think it sort of leaves us with this sort of open-ended where to next. But it's quite a fascinating journey that actually looks like it's quite, it's steps into new territory, which still totally makes sense. You're still drawing on that previous work in really powerful way, I think. So it's sort of, I'm just curious to see what happens next with the improv group as well, to see how that develops. There's a question just about the keyboard, but
the keyboards to make the soundtracks. There's always music, there's always a soundtrack to what I make, to the film, whether it's performance or film or just a sound piece. It's kind of the music, I think, is a very important part, plays a very important part to everything I make, really. And
that you mentioned earlier that you're in a band as well.
You
use the keyboards in the band as well, or?
But it plays the role of, like, again, that sort of seduction, or like, I think it's just like one of the most music's one of the most sort of manipulative tools you can use, I think, in terms of sort of dictating how an audience might feel. And I'm kind of interested in doing that, and like I said, sort of doing that whilst also making that apparent that that's what I'm doing, if you know what I mean. I kind of
well, often it's that idea of when music is so manipulative. There's a scene where there isn't music and you're still, it really emotionally pulls or controls you kind of sometimes aware that there's no music, and that, wow, it's like this.
Sometimes that is even more powerful sometimes when there's nothing. But like, I think I don't know, I kind of want to take, I think about the audience a lot, and about viewer a lot, and sort of almost sort of think of my work as a collaboration with them in a way, in terms of how I'm thinking about them, how I'm always thinking about what the work's doing. That's more in the editing process rather than before. That's kind of like later on in the process where I'm thinking about that a lot more, and sort of wanting to engage the viewers as somebody that's active and that's coming along with me, rather than being this kind of more, rather than a passive viewer kind of just consuming. I kind of want it to be that's what, it's the attempt anyway. You can only try.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alice. Really enjoyed that, and I think other people are really enjoying it too. We're gonna wrap up, so you'll have to look out and see what we'll release information as things are happening and ideas are developing with Alex over the coming months. And I just want to also mention that our current shows with Sajan Kuna and Natasha McVoy are open today till 5 and tomorrow on Saturday 12 till 5. But there's also, if you don't know about it, there's the Palestine Information and Activation Day happening over at the Old Printworks tomorrow from 12 to 8 p.m. And I think that, recommend people go along to that if they want to find out more information about Palestine, or if you're looking for a safe space and to meet other people in the city. And I'm sure there are other events like this happening in many other cities across the UK. It's organised by artists here in Birmingham and supported by a range of art organisations. So wanted to share that with you all. There's information on our Instagram and lots of other people's posts. Thanks again, Alice, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks. Bye.